not actually prohibited. So how do you say that the Torah prohibits melacha, work? So trying to remember. I can't remember the name right now. The basic definition he came up with is that what the Torah meant when it said work, and in context it makes a lot of sense. He said that you should refrain from creative work. Creative work, work which creates something new in the world, a change in the world. In the context of Shabbat Bereshit, that we're commemorating the creation of the world, it makes sense that only creative work is what's prohibited. So that's the basic principle that you have to realize. It's not that every work, it's not every effort. You could work really hard serving the food and from the kitchen table. You can work hard at bringing books to a shir. There's nothing wrong with working hard. There's a definition called sort of a subcategory of work, which is called creative work. And creative work is really what the Torah wants us to refrain from, commemorating, of course, that God rested from his creating the world on the seventh day. Now, once we have this established, then we get to the second step, and this is something that is derived from the Torah, and that is, okay, what actions are considered creative work? Is writing, creating? Well, that's creative writing, right? There is, what about plowing? Okay, well, you're producing new flowers. So it's hard to figure out exactly what the actions are. Along come our sages, and they helped us out with this. And they said, we have a tradition which does have roots in the actual verses of the Torah, which we won't get into now. Excellent article by Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun, who found perhaps a principle. There's a few ways that the Talmud derives that we have 39 categories of work, but the basic anchor which the sages use is the building of the Mishkan. Building of the Mishkan very aptly has so many parallels to the creation of the world. The language is used is very similar. We have at the end of Shabbat, Vayechulu Hashamayim V'aretz. We all know that from Friday night. So in the Mishkan, when the Jews in the desert are building this tabernacle, it says Vayichal Moshe Lasot et Kol HaMelacha. The same verb Vayichal, and then Lasot gets repeated tens of times, and there are many parallels. If you look in Nechama Leibovich's book on the Shmot, she points out quite a few of the similarities. But beyond that, I referenced Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun's article, where he references, of course, this passages in the Talmud where they derive this type of derivation, that type of derivation. There's a list when the Torah says that the Jewish people built the Mishkan. There's a list of all the items that they built and all the materials they used. And believe it or not, guess how many items are in the list? 39. Is that an accident? Is that a coincidence? I dare say that it's quite telling that there are 39 items in the list about the Mishkan. And this is right in the next pasuk after the Torah says, when you're building the Mishkan, you must not violate the Shabbat. And the very next list is a list of 39 items. So this concept about what gets defined as creative work is basically learned from the list of activities that were done in order to build the Mishkan. Some Rishonim say it's not only building the Mishkan, also we learn out from what was done for the upkeep of the Mishkan, for the daily running, for the routine service which was performed in the temple. And so, what is melacha? Not just work, but creative work. And what is creative work? Creative work we learn out from what the Torah tells us, and how the sages divided up how the Jewish people built this tabernacle in the desert. Okay, is that clear? Very important principle. And then from here, everything gets defined. So it's really a little bit. You have to suspend your your assumptions. What is work? What is not work? And we have to train ourselves to think of what's going to be prohibited on Shabbat is if it's defined as one of these 39 types of creative work. Okay? Let's read it inside. We're going to start at page 140 in the middle of the page. Good morning. Okay, everybody ready? We're page 140. I'm glad we're all here. Now Binyamin is here too. Terrific. And this afternoon, I'm going to see if I can work it to go and pick some or package some vegetables with you guys. I would like to. I just found out now that it's in the afternoon. On the one hand, that's better for me. On the other hand, I already had made an appointment for this afternoon. So we'll see if I can work them both out together. And maybe I'll join for part of the time or something like that. Okay? Anyways, now that's going to be, we'll see what kind of malacha it is over there, what kind of work we're going to be doing. So page 140, that's chapter 9, section 1, in the middle of section 1, on page 140, in the middle of the page. Yosef, start us off, please.
When the Torah
prohibits
doing malacha, it means creative work. Like the malacha Menachem performed when creating the Mishkan, vertical. Activities that do not create anything new, even if they are physically strenuous, are not prohibited. For example, carrying a needle from a reshut lahayachid, private domain, to a reshut harabim, public domain, is considered a malacha. While moving chairs and tables within the same domain is not. Reheating cooked food on Shabbat is not a melacha, whereas cooking raw food on Shabbat is attaching a window to its hinges is considered a melacha, even if it is easy to do. Whereas opening and shutting a window is not a melacha. Reattaching a broken table leg is considered a melacha, but lengthening the table by adding a leaf designated for such use is not. We derive a fundamental principle from Mishkan. Just as the Mishkan was built with intent and planning to work with every skilled craft, Melechet Machshevet, Shemot, so too on Shabbat, the Torah prohibits only Melechet Machshevet, one who performs a melacha with a shinui in a regular manner, unintentionally, lo letzorech gufa, for a different purpose, see below, non-constructively or without meaning for it to last, has not transgressed a Torah prohibition. In all of these cases, he has not performed menachet machshavet. Nevertheless, most of the above cases are rabbinically prohibited. The sages state in the Mishnah, the laws of Shabbat are like mountains hanging by a hair, with a few scriptural sources and numerous laws. Chagiga. Indeed, countless laws of Shabbat are based on the melachot of the Mishkan. There are numerous further discussions about the shiurim, measures that constitute the transgression of a melacha. For example, when it comes to melachot that relate to food preparation, if one makes a quantity of food the size of a dried fig, he is liable. If the transgression was unintentional, he is liable to bring a sin offering. If intentional, the punishment is death. If the quantity was less than that, even though he has transgressed the Torah prohibition, he is exempt from punishment. In contrast, when it comes to Choresh, Zorea, Kotzer, and Boneh, even the smallest act tenders one liable. In order to keep our subject matter manageable, we will limit our discussion of what one may and may not do to matters of practical.
Okay, so this is very packed. Let's try to unpack, and we'll do it with the use of the board, with your permission. Okay, we started off saying that, we're talking about the laws of Shabbat. What's prohibited? What's prohibited is melacha. Okay? Melacha means work. But then we fine-tune that to say, well, actually, what really is only creative work. And this we just discussed before. Then we say, well, what's creative work? It's defined by the 39 categories of work that were used to build the Mishkan, right? 39 categories of the Mishkan. So far, so good. Now, about the Mishkan, the Torah gives us another definition, and it says, for the Mishkan, what was done was intentional work. Melechet machshevet. Melechet is just the smichut of malacha. Machshava is the thought, right? So machshevet is intentional work. Now, what is intentional work? It means, in that last paragraph on page 140, he says there's 5 conditions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It has to be done in the regular way. What else did he say there? It has to be done intentionally, not by accident. Intentional. What else? It has to be done for, I'll add in here a word that he didn't say, but it makes it simple for now. The original purpose of why they did that malacha. Number 4 is it has to be done for a constructive purpose, not a destructive one. That's called in Hebrew tikkun instead of kilkul. Mitzorch tikkun. And the last one is it has to be to last, or permanently, you could say, to last as opposed to temporary. All these 5 conditions must be met for it to be considered a biblical prohibition, prohibited from the Torah. So if something is not done in the regular manner, this is the most common. The opposite of doing something done in the regular manner in Hebrew is shinui. If you do something bishinui, in a change from the normal manner. So normally, I carry things in my hands, right? So if I'm carrying something outside of the domain, it's prohibited. But what if I hold it like this? Mm-hmm. That's not a normal way to carry things. So I'm not violating the biblical command. It's still prohibited rabbinically, but it's not as severe. Similarly, if I tie my shoe. Wait, tying a knot is one of the 39 categories of work. How can I tie my shoe? Well, it's only prohibited if it's a knot that's going to last. So to do a double knot might be a biblical prohibition. But to do a single knot, what do we do? A single knot in a bow that you're going to open up in a matter of hours when you take your shoes off, that is allowed. It's not considered to be a proper knot that's going to be there. Lekaima is the Aramaic word for that. So you can see that this is what we have to get to the final goal here. The goal that we're trying to avoid is if you have all this, all of the goal, violation. Biblical violation is punishable by death if they're witnesses and it's intentional, and punishable by, you can bring a sacrifice to atone for it in the temple, but we're trying to avoid a biblical prohibition. Many times, we're going to see in all the details, there's more room to be flexible if, first of all, it's not one of the 39 categories of work, or it's not done in one of these 5 ways, or one of these 5 ways is not, these conditions is not fulfilled. Instead, then usually it becomes only a rabbinic prohibition. Rabbinic prohibition, sometimes the rabbis can be more lenient and flexible about it if there's a great need, or if there's a loss of money involved, a great amount of money, or if there is someone is sick, the rabbis were lenient about the rabbinical prohibitions. But you have to make sure that you're away from the biblical prohibition first. Rabbis have much less leeway when it comes to biblical prohibitions. So these conditions, the Torah says, when we're building the Mishkan, it's called Melechet Machshevet. It's thought out, premeditated, intentional, and permanent, constructive, and done in the regular way. All those things are critical for understanding the most severe violations of Shabbat. Is that clear? Yeah.
So he's thinking purely biblical level on this opening paragraph. Right?
Exactly. This paragraph is giving you some
There is
basic
definition
definition.
by some people, and there are
That may be Asher Torah according to some people. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Just put it down. Perfect. That's great.
When we say to last to is there any time frame for it?
Yes. And there's one other thing that to take into consideration here. Where'd my blue marker go? I was just using a blue marker and it disappeared. Because I put it in my pocket.
About doing exercises, physical exercises.
It's a good question.
Some push-ups in the morning or something.
Right. It's a good question. We're going to see. Obviously, it doesn't. They didn't do push-ups to build the Mishkan, so it doesn't fit into any one of the 39 categories. So on the face of it, the simple answer is it's permitted. You're allowed to do it. If it doesn't fit into any of these 39 categories, it's allowed. However, there's rabbinic strictures, which is like a second layer. And the rabbis were concerned that Shabbat would become, well, there's a few reasons, a few angles where the sages spoke about exercise. One angle is that it's sort of like medicine. Medicine in general is prohibited, unless you're, of course, very ill. But if it's just a small, little, minor ailment, you're not supposed to do medicine. Because if you do medicine, you might grind up the spices for taking all the medicines. Nowadays, we buy them in the pharmacy. But there's some places where they still grind the medicines from herbs and from all sorts of flowers and spices. And the grinding is one of the 39 categories. So rabbis were very reticent to do anything that looks too much like medical procedures. That's one angle where they say maybe exercise is not such a good idea because it's a health sort of like medicine. And the other angle is that it's a change in the atmosphere of the day. That's sort of like a general principle that the rabbis are trying to preserve the atmosphere of Shabbat. And but the simple answer is it's not one of the 39 categories. It's not prohibited. Right? Rabbinically, there are some concerns. And we're going to talk about it later in this volume, or probably in the next volume. Can't remember where it is. Okay, other questions? So far, so good. There's one other thing that he mentioned that we didn't talk about here, is that to reach a biblical violation, we're going to go with one more step here. There has to be the measurement. It's only going to be biblically prohibited if it's the full measurement. So, for example, I said before, you're not allowed to grind up spices. How much grinding? If you grind one speck of sand, or if you grind up a half a vegetable, a half of a slice of cucumber, is that going to be punishable by stoning? No, there's a requisite measurement. Now, for most food items, they use the size of a date. Regarding other issues, like he said, building, if you take a hammer and a nail and you put one nail into two pieces of wood and you connect them, or you connect a beam to a house, even with one nail, that is the requisite measurement. So for each one of the 39 categories, there's details. Some of them the measurement is larger, some of them the measurement is smaller, and so there's you have to make sure that this box is ticked as well. Sometimes you're going to say that it's going to be only rabbinic because it's less than the full measurement. The full measurement. Okay, so there's one more condition here before you get to the biblical violation. Okay, so let's get into some details. Now that was just sort of like an overview of, even though at first glance it seems like, wow, Shabbat, you're living on the edge of a cliff. Every action you do It could be punishable by death. It could be a biblical violation. We see that because one of the conditions is that it's malech only the 39 categories, and only 30 categories when they're done in the normal way, when they're done with intention, when they're done with the original intention, the original purpose, when they're done in a constructive manner, when they're done to last only these 5 conditions with the full measurement, then you get to the biblical prohibition. So it's not always you've got a little buffer zone before the cliff. It's not like you're always walking on the edge of the cliff. You do have to be very careful. And the truth is, the more you learn the laws of Shabbat, you realize how a lot of people are not so careful, and they're really doing things that might be close to a violation. Now, sometimes the rabbi will ask himself, wait a minute, I know that there's this principle here, that it's only going to be biblical violation if it's intentional. So, should I tell you that this is prohibited on Shabbat? Well, then you might do it, but now you'll know that it's prohibited. It'll be if I don't tell you and you don't know, then you're not doing it intentionally. So, anyways, there's it's a little bit of a catch-22 there. But of course, we want to know the rules. We want to know how to keep Shabbat in the best possible way. And but it's true. I don't go around putting it on billboards. This is how you have to make tea on Shabbat. Be careful when you're separating out your rotten apples from the bushel, because separating is one of. I'm not going out and teaching all the laws that I know to everybody right away until I'm convinced that they're going to actually be careful about what they learn. Because sometimes the more you know can get you into more trouble. But anyways, these are the basic principles. Okay, let's continue inside, and we'll see a little more. For Stephen, who came late, we can review, and the next passage, which will, you jumped in the middle. We put a lot of stuff on the board, but pretty much we're backtracking to Shabbat Melacha is creative work. How do we define what's creative? From the categories of the Mishkan. And now let's see them inside. Okay, turn to the next page. Next page. Well, page 141 at the bottom, and he gives a little bit of meaning to this system. He says the implication is that the primary purpose of humanity created in God's image is to be a partner with God in improving the world. Our job is to create, to continue the creation of the world that God started. The primary way to improve the world is by erecting the Mishkan, where the Shekhinah dwells. We're not only supposed to build highways and bridges and homes for ourselves. We're also supposed to build a home for the Shekhinah. Light spreads from the Mishkan throughout the world. Next page, page 142, at the top of the page now. Revealing that the whole world deserves to be a receptacle for the Shekhinah. For the Shekhinah dwells wherever one works for the sake of heaven, with honesty and kindness, in order to increase goodness in the world. It is there that the holiness of the Mishkan spreads. Thus, the essence of Melacha in this world is to build an abode for the Shekhinah. What are we doing in this world? Trying to bring more holiness and godliness into our lives. Yet, despite its value, we are commanded to desist from Melacha on Shabbat. Just as God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th, thus imbuing 6 days with deep meaning, so too we are commanded to rest on Shabbat. By doing so, we're able to reveal the deeper value of all of the melachot. As we saw in chapter 1, we spoke about this, that we actually can find meaning in all of our activities as we refrain from the activities on the 7th day. Here are the 39 melachot. Here's a list. Everybody see the list? If you like, I'll give you a few minutes and you can copy them down on that piece of paper. It's a good way to remember things. Does anybody need a piece of paper? Right behind? Is there no paper over there?
I just sent it away.
Oh, there's no paper. There's no paper. Who can donate a piece of paper? I'm a poor man. Who can donate? Who can donate a piece of paper? Oh, thank you. Please. I'm begging you. Please, can you give to me? Ah, wait, I don't need that. I have my own. After all. Who needs a piece of paper? I'll be a giver, not a taker. Who needs a piece of paper? Who needs a piece of paper? Ah, here you go. There you go. Who else needs a piece? Oh, a pen now. You also want? I can do that too. I can give you a piece of paper. Who needs a pen? Here's another one. It should work. You just have to scratch it a little bit, and then it should come out. Anybody else? Everybody good? Okay. So I'm going to give you a hint to remembering them off by heart. The first 11 are called Sidur Dapat. The first 11 is a series which brings us to food, preparing food. Baking bread, in particular, is something they did in the Mishkan. And in order to bake bread, you have to sow, that's the plant. You have to plow, reap the harvest, gather up what you've harvested in bundles, and then you thresh it. Threshing is separating the kernels from the stalks. And then you winnow it. There's 4 malachot, 6, 7, 8, and 9, all have to do with separating out the good from the bad. The winnowing is by use of the wind. You sort of throw up the produce and the chaff blows away. The thin, light chaff gets blown away by the wind. Borer, separating. Borer, tochen is grinding. Merakeh is grinding also. That's not quite separating. 3 is the third melacha is of sifting. Sifting is with a sifter. Number 10 is lash, kneading, and finally 11 is ofeh, baking. You see that? It's 11 basically in one series. You can remember those. When you get up to number 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 and 22, 23, and 24, all of those, the next 13 melachot, are all part of a series of preparing textiles, preparing clothing or curtains or something. You have to, usually you take off the wool from the sheep. That's why it starts off with number 12. Goes as tzemer, shearing the wool. And then you've got to process that raw wool. You cut off the sheep's body. You have to launder it, melabin. You have to comb the wool. Usually you dye it a certain color. Toveh, you spin the wool into threads. And then there's a few melachot, 17, 18, 19, and 20, all have to do with weaving those threads on a loom. Do you know what a loom is? That big machine for weaving? And all those are different elements of, I'll show you one day what it looks like. Different activities. Then kosher matir, sometimes you tie the string, you untie the string if one of the threads needs to be replaced. And then also stitching together two different sections of a garment or of a curtain. And of course, tearing apart the garment so that you can stitch it up in the right order. All those up till 24. We're already more than halfway through. It's basically 2 processes. The process of preparing food up until number 11, and then the next 13 have to do with textiles. Okay, so far so good. Now we're up to 25.
Like I said, until the first 11 were to do with making bread.
Correct.
The Shabbat.
This
This is more like curtains that made up the Mishkan. The carvings.
We're up to 25 now. 25 is preparing not textiles, but preparing skins. There were skins used in the temple. And also for our lives. Of course, we eat and we need clothing. These are basic needs of human beings. It makes sense that we're using them as categories of work. What does man do with his creativity? He prepares himself food, prepares himself clothing, and the skins are also used for the roof of the Mishkan. Very good, very good. We also use skins to write the Sefer Torah, parchment, yeah. But in the Mishkan, you're right, it had to do with the coverings. So that what is number 25 is trapping the animal, and then slaughtering the animal, and then skinning the animal, and then tanning. You have to process that leather, and then you mark it. When you're going to write on it, usually you have to make lines in the skin, in the leather. Memachek, you smooth for the writing to really be absorbed. It has to be further processed by smoothing, and then mechatech, we cut it to size. Finally, if you're going to write on these parchments, so then the malacha of writing and erasing. Here, for some reason, part of the definition of the malacha is the measurement, 2 letters. Writing 2 letters or erasing 2 letters. Okay, so pretty much you could say the next series is from 25 to 33. Right? So that's another 8, because those are about leather. So we have textiles, then we have processing leather and writing on it. And finally, the last, we're only left with 6 more, and we have a few pairs. Just like we had Kotef and Mochekar was a pair. So also Bona and Soter 34 and 35, building and demolishing. Mechaber and Mavir, extinguishing fire and lighting a fire. And the last 2 are not really a pair, but Makeba Patish is applying the finishing touch. Sometimes when you, the final hammer blow is really what the words mean literally. So completing the creation of something that definitely is creative. That's really the final creative touch. And finally, the last one is the most surprising one we started with. It's explicit, implied in the Torah, at least. The Torah does speak about taking things out, carrying from one domain to another, motzi, hotza'ah. So that's number 39. So these 39 activities are called avot melacha, primary categories. But there are other activities which are similar. They're also prohibited. They're called toladot, like a babies, like derivatives of these primary categories. And both of them are prohibited from the Torah. Anything that's a toladah of the Av is prohibited, and the distinction between them is for more of a technical matter when it comes to how many sacrifices you'd have to bring if you were in the temple times. So the punishments, which we don't really apply nowadays, is why you have to know whether it's an Av or a Toladah. But we understand that both the Avot and the Toladot, the primary categories and the derivative categories, are prohibited biblically from the Torah. Now, the best book that I know about the laws of Shabbat, it's obviously the one we're using. But there's another one. Everybody take a look. This is a children's book. It's beautiful. Well done. It's about everything that we're learning now. And it goes through the 39 categories of work and gives you practical implementations. Take a look at this, for example. They show you how a loom works and how you're putting the threads on the loom in each one of the biblically that they have in the corner here in the yellow, like an old ancient person. That's the way it used to look in biblical times. And then they have with the little children doing all sorts of the more practical modern day applications of it. Right? So we have here somebody painting, or what you have, combing and dyeing. Combing and dyeing, they would comb the threads and put them in a vat. Nowadays we have spray paint. Right? So we see how it gets applied from the basic original categories. Here's another category. Each page has a few of these categories that we've been learning about. Here's baking the bread. And are you allowed to heat up your food on a radiator? It's an extension of cooking. When is it allowed? When is it prohibited? This is what we're going to learn. It's an excellent book for you to. It's here in the room in Machon Meir. You're welcome to learn it, study it here. But I would ask that you do not take it home, because then nobody here will have access to it. Okay, so this is going to be in our room. You can take it for a day. You can buy it at any Jewish bookstore that has English Jewish books here in Israel. I'll draw you a map. So it's right here. People don't know. Here's Machon Meir. Okay, this is where we are. You with me? You go outside the door, turn right, and there's a little circle, right? Right? You turn left. Here's the kiosk. Here's the makolet. And you go down the street until an intersection, right? You keep going down. This street is called Beit Ha-Defus, the printers street. There must have been a lot of printers, printing presses, companies. Anyways, this street, it goes down and around and up, and it continues and continues, continues, continues. You keep walking straight. Keep walking straight. Keep walking straight. About maybe 15 minutes. And then on the left-hand side, there's a big, big supermarket. Over here, there's a Rami Levi. So one supermarket. All the way through, there's different, there's commercial areas. But towards the end, after 15 minutes, there's a big supermarket. It's called Osher Ad. A lot of products from America, like Costco type of, it's designed for big Haredi families, so they have bulk, a lot of buying in bulk, but it's a nice supermarket. And opposite the supermarket, there's a little strip mall. And over here is a bookstore that's called Feldheim. And also maybe Menucha, I don't know, it has another name, but this is the bookstore. They have tons of English language books right over here, about 15 to 20 minute walk. From here, it's pretty much straight on our street. You just go from the circle, you turn left, and you walk straight all the way, and you'll see a great, nice bookstore to buy all this for sure, and many other books in English for your reading pleasure. Is that clear? You don't have to go to town, and there's other ones, the famous one in the center of town is Pomeranz bookstore, and there's Manny's. There's a lot of Jewish bookstores, of course, in the old city. There's Moriah, very nice bookstore as well. They all have English books, all those that I mentioned before. But this one's local. That's why I'm showing you. It's on our street, just down the street. That's the one above. Kanfei Sharim, you would have to turn right here, and then be on this street. This is Kanfei Sharim. Kanfei Sharim. It's a parallel street called Beit Dfus. Okay. It's not as major a street as Kanfei Sharim, but it's still, there's lots of stores on either side, and there's coffee shops, and doctor's offices and supermarkets and car garages and all sorts of stuff like that. Beit Hadfus is the name of the street. And the Beit Hadfus, it just starts over here. Over here, this is called, what's the street called that we're on?
Meir.
No, this is Hameiri. This is Hameiri that we're on here. This is Hameiri. What's this street? I think it's called Kiryat Moshe Street. Yeah? I think it turns into Beit Hadfus after the light. Okay, this is Kiryat Moshe Street, and this is Beit Hadfus Street, if I'm not mistaken. Anyways. Yes, sir.
And how about turning the light, playing some instrument or sing, and put more wood and fire? Like where I live, there use a thing to heat the place because it's very cold in the winter there.
Yeah.
So I always turn that before Shabbat, like the Friday.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't put more wood, that will stop function. It will be like a -10.
Wow. Yeah, those are all good questions, and we're going to relate to them in the next few weeks. So you're going to have to stay. But I'll try to answer one at one. But for the last question you asked, which is the most practical one, the most important one, because you don't want to freeze to death. This was a question that was raised by Jewish communities in Europe who lived in very cold countries for hundreds and hundreds of years. So they had the same problem. It may be not as cold as the city, or maybe even colder. I don't know. It depends. There's lots of, Jews lived in Siberia. It's be very, very, even more cold, right? So how can you survive? So you're right. We stoke the fires before Shabbat starts. We put in as much of the wood as we can so that it'll stay warm all night long without anybody touching it, without anybody adding wood to the fire, because that's one of the 39 categories, lighting a fire, right? And adding to the fire is also prohibited. But then what do you do in the morning when there's no more room? You've stuffed it as much as you could and there's no more room. So here we get into basically the Jews in Israel. It's not that cold. In Israel, you can survive without the furnace in the daytime for most 99 days percent of the year, right? Here and there it might get really, really cold, but in those other countries, it's a weekly occurrence for 6 months. You can't survive. So they rely on the following. What the Torah forbids us to do is for us to do any work on Shabbat. Us, the Jewish people. But the Shabbat is a gift given to the Jewish people. It's a unique bond, the covenant between the Jewish people and how we're supposed to behave on Shabbat. But it doesn't say anywhere that the non-Jews have to keep Shabbat. The non-Jews are allowed to light fires on Shabbat. Now it's true. The rabbis made, that's what we're going to talk about next. Everything that we have on the board is the conditions for a biblical violation. But imagine that there's a whole nother layer of concern, and that is the rabbinical prohibitions. In this case, there is a rabbinical prohibition from having a Jew asking a non-Jew to do work for him on Shabbat. So you cannot say, well, I'm not going to strike a match, but I'll ask the non-Jew to come over. Will you strike a match for me? The rabbi says that's forbidden. You're not allowed to ask non-Jews to do work for you on Shabbat. As I said before, though, if it's a rabbinic prohibition, then the rabbis allowed flexibility. And if you're living in a country where you're going to freeze to death, and people get sick when you're too cold, especially older people or babies, so the rabbis were lenient, and they said, in those circumstances, you can ask a non-Jew to light the fire, to stoke the furnace, to heat up the house for you. And this was the way Jews lived until today. There's some Jews who every week they have a system where a non-Jew comes in and does things on their behalf. Now it's better that you don't tell him to do it on Shabbat. You prearrange. Say, listen, I want you to come to my house on Saturday morning at 8 a.m. and stoke the fire. You're not telling him to do it on Shabbat, which is primarily what the Torah prohibits, is actions which we do on Shabbat. So even the speech, telling him you shouldn't be doing it on Shabbat. If you tell him on Friday, or Thursday, or Wednesday, that I want you to come on Saturday, then in cases of extreme need, the rabbis were flexible and said it's not a violation. It's worthwhile to use the non-Jew. Is that clear? So do you have a few non-Jews where you live?
Yeah.
Quite a few, I think, right?
But,
I'd say everybody, right?
I think no, because I live isolated, so it was just me in my house.
If it's just you've got trouble, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not like I would die or something like that. But it's very cold because it's near to the jungle and all that.
Do you not have any neighbor that you could ask to come over and help you out on fresh Saturday morning?
In Shabbat, normally, no.
Wow.
It's like a small thing, you just put a small amount of wood and
Yes, it's a
like
small,
for 1 or 2 hours, and after this, you put more.
Well,
But
maybe.
it's the best now.
Well, we spoke about it already, essentially, that in your circumstance, if you want to join the Jewish people, in order to convert, you really have to move into a Jewish community. In any case, you won't be able to convert unless you're in a Jewish community. So I don't know how long you'll be spending all isolated by yourself if you actually do want to become a Jew.
No,
You're either going to have to be in Israel or in a Jewish community where there's an established Jewish community. Whenever there's a established Jewish community, either they have a system or they have non-Jews that they utilize to help them in such circumstances. Doing it on your own, by yourself, can be difficult in those conditions. Yeah, I don't know if there's a simple solution. I mean, if that's your life, you would create a solution. You'd build a furnace where you could put 10 times the amount of wood in not just a small amount of wood, right? If that was your only choice and you were a Jew living on a desert island and you knew that on Shabbat it's going to be 24 hours, I'm not allowed to play with the fire. So you'd build a bigger fuel tank in this case, or you'd get a different type of fuel that you use that has a bigger tank, a different type of heater. So you find solutions. But ultimately, your direction has to be to...
Yeah, today I have it's more for the past. Today I have my air conditioner and just...
Oh, you do. You leave it on from beforehand. I see.
City now.
Oh, now you live in the
This
city.
is more like in the past to figure out how a person
Could potentially. It wasn't a practical question. I see. Okay, fine. Good question. The other things you asked about playing music.
Playing music like guitar.
Right. Again, I love questions, so keep asking the questions. Although the questions do take us, out of the organized presentation, but it's fine. We won't have time for everything. So the most important material to cover are your questions. So it might not be in the right order, but so about musical instruments. Singing is not prohibited. Singing is allowed. It's not. But using musical instruments is also not one of the 39 categories of work. But here we have a rabbinic stricture. The rabbi said, why do we prohibit using a guitar or a sitar or any type of musical instrument? Because what?
You might repair strings.
Many times when you play guitar, the strings break and then you might tie them. Tying is one of the 39 categories. You wrote it down, right? Tying and untying a knot. So the rabbi said, don't play any instruments because you might fix them in a prohibited manner. And so that's why we don't use on Shabbat a guitar in our singing. We just sing vocally. And some people even say, don't drum on the table even. Some say, it's not a drum, it's just, you're banging on the table to keep the beat that's allowed. But there's a discussion of it, because essentially the rabbis prohibited using musical instruments for to avoid any biblical violation, to avoid getting even close to something which would lead you to violate the Torah's laws about Shabbat. Yes, Hanan, you want to ask something?
About the hotel key, nowadays we use the card, right? This is a tool, right?
Yes, this is it's a new question. It's come up in the last 10 years more and more. It's very common now. Many hotels, they don't give you a manual physical key, but they give you a card that has an electronic chip in it, which if you put it on the door, and then it unlocks the door for you. So in general, I think you also asked that too, what about using electronics in general? That's a chapter in the book, second volume. We're going to get to it, but I'll give you the overview. In general, we avoid activating electronics on Shabbat. Even if you have a watch, we don't push the buttons on the watch because that's electronic. So we don't want to do that on Shabbat. Even there's some fridges which have sensors in the refrigerator. Every time you open the door or close the door, some rabbis don't like that. They say we have to disable that function so that you're able to use your refrigerator on Shabbat, because we don't want to be activating on Shabbat any electronics. So how can I get into my hotel room is your question. How can I use those door keys, electronic keys? Some rabbis say it's prohibited. You're not allowed to. And what you have to do is you go to a hotel that does have a mechanical key. And most hotels in Israel, the big hotels anyways, they have these electronic keys. But if you ask at the desk, say, can I get a Shabbat key? You give them a deposit, you go over Friday afternoon, they give you a mechanical key, you say, what room are you in? They have the keys for all the doors, just for the sake of emergencies or whatever, and they will give you a mechanical key instead of the electronic key. Most hotels have the dual system, so if possible, great. Now, what happens if they don't? Some hotels, like in Europe, they don't have too many Shabbat observers, so they don't have to be aware of this. And especially in more modern hotels, maybe they don't even have a mechanical key to give you. It's just not an option. Some rabbis say, you're not allowed to stay there. Go find a different home. Find a different hotel. There are some rabbis who have a different approach to electronics, and they rely on all sorts of fancy footwork, fancy halachic footwork, and they say that when we actually dissect the electronics involved, it's a very minimal, very small amount of use of the electronics, and when push comes to shove, you're allowed to use those keys. There are some rabbis that allow it. Right now, I'd say it's it's on the edge. I'd say it's a minority, very, very small minority of rabbis. So you really should try to arrange a system where maybe they could, what I do, I'll tell you what I do. There's ways around it. There's just practical tips. Not that I travel so much, but when I did travel a little bit, and I was in Shabbat in Europe, and they didn't have a mechanical key to give me. So there's all sorts of tips. You can look on YouTube. They have like hacks. So this is the hack. So first of all your valuables, whether it's your wallet, your keys, your phone, whatever, your computer, you put them in the safe. And the safe is locked, and it's a safe place for your valuables. So the rest of the stuff is your clothing. Somebody's going to steal your underwear, so you don't really care whether the door is open or locked. And so basically, you leave the door open all Shabbat. You don't tell anybody. I don't want to invite them to come in. But how do you do that? Most hotel doors lock automatically. I don't know if you've been to a hotel, but you just close the door and it's locked, sometimes by accident. You don't realize it because that's the way they set up the doors. So what you can do is you can maybe put a piece of tape on the side of the door where the little tongue comes out. And that way, even if you close the door fully, it won't get locked. So basically, you leave your door open all Shabbat, and you don't use the key to get in and out. And that's a good solution. Sometimes you can even, if you don't have a safe inside the room, you can go to the front desk and say, I want to give you my computer, I want to give you my phone for 24 hours, and they'll put it in their safe. And then your room is open. Nobody has to know because they don't see the tape that's on the side of the door. Some people actually, you attach a string to if there's a door handle that gets pushed down, so you attach a string and then you put the string underneath the door. And so when you want to come in, you pull that string from underneath the door, that turns the handle, and then you can go in. There's all sorts of hacks that you can think of. But according to most poskim, we don't use the electronics. We find a different solution. Is that clear? Here in Israel, you really should, every hotel usually has a rabbi associated because the hotels are kosher. 90% of the hotels are kosher. The ones that are not kosher, they're not catering to religious public whatsoever, then maybe there's nobody to ask. But most hotels, the hotel you're staying in, or your family's staying in, for sure is kosher, and therefore there's a rabbi associated, and you can speak to the rabbi, and he will make arrangements. They could also turn off the fuse for that room, or a few rooms in a row for the electronic door. There's many solutions, but we try to avoid using the electronics. Is the bottom line. Getting a mechanical key is the simplest, the most common solution. Most hotels can give you a mechanical key if you ask for it, for the sake of Shabbat. They'll ask for a little deposit because people will lose their keys, but you get the deposit back after Shabbat, and that's fine. Okay? Another question, Israel. Yeah.
Before in Hong Kong, I little experience the hotel. They know the Jews understand the Shabbat. So before the Friday night, keep the key for them, and I going, and then I cannot keep the instruction for them, but they don't understand. They bring the key, how to open the door.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, excellent. So another solution that similar to what we mentioned before, that there is a prohibition of asking a non-Jew to do work for you on Shabbat, to do melacha for you on Shabbat. However, if you're not explicitly asking them on Shabbat, you prearrange it, and in some places the hotel staff, they're on call 24 hours, and if you say to them, please help me get into my room, because I don't want to use the electronic key. So they'll come up to the room with you, and they'll open the door. And as long as it's not explicitly telling them what to do, and B, it's for the sake of a mitzvah, like sleeping on Shabbat is a mitzvah. Having a place to rest is part of the Shabbat procedure. And so, yes, many times you can have a non-Jew that's going to be serving you, helping you, assisting you, do the things that you can't do. Also, in some elevators, you have to push a button. So you have a non-Jew that comes with you, and he can push the buttons instead of you. You try to avoid touching any electronics on Shabbat. There's some places, though, it's getting harder and harder, because you walk into the room, the lights turn on automatically. You don't have to flick a switch. Say, I want to leave on a light, like I do in my home. I leave on a small light where I need it during the nighttime, or I have a timer that turns the lights off and on. There's many different solutions. But this is not your home. You don't have a solution. The lights go on automatically, and they go off automatically when you leave the room. Can you enter the room? Here, there's a few more rabbis that are lenient about this issue, because this issue is you're not really intending It's not intentional. When you walk in the room, you just want to go to bed. You just want to get in and lie down. You're not intending to turn on the lights. But by your walking there, it's an unintended consequence. And so most rabbis say it's a problem because you know for sure it's going to happen. You can't play dumb. But there's long discussions about this. This is the cutting edge of halachic discussions today because it's more and more common. Electronic sensors are everywhere, and they're becoming more and more present everywhere. And this opinion of some rabbis, very big rabbis, is, I think, going to become more needed to rely on. That they say if you can't walk down the street sometimes. You walk down the street, the neighbor's light goes on, right? You activate it by walking. I'm just walking down the street. I didn't mean to turn on his light. He wanted to turn on his light automatically to scare away burglars. So some rabbis say you should walk to the other side of the street. If you know it's there, you should avoid it. Some rabbis say, forget it. You're not intending to turn on the light. You're just wanting to walk. As long as you're not even making one extra step, not one extra movement. You're doing your regular movements for your intended purposes. And if something else gets activated, that's not your concern. There is such an opinion. I believe it might get more popular because of the necessity. But to this day, it's a matter of debate. And we still try to avoid any electronic activations on Shabbat. Okay? If it's possible, yeah.
No, and then about the alarm, most of the people nowadays does not have the clock or the watch, Can they put the alarm on the phone and then just something like that?
It's a good question. So my son or somebody just showed me that there's an app, a Shabbat alarm clock app that you can put on your phone. So what's the problem? You can set the alarm on your phone on Friday to go off on Shabbat. It'll wake you up to come to shul, wake you up to go to your meal, whatever it is. There's no problem with that because you're doing it on Friday. The problem is when the alarm rings, it makes noise and it won't turn off unless you push the button. Now that's on Shabbat. That's a problem. You can't turn off the alarm.
I got a special one on Friday, and you can set I want it to go on for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15.
Perfect. So that's basically what this app does. Is that it's an alarm, which is a little more features than the standard alarm, which comes with your operating system. And basically that's all it does. It turns it off automatically after 5 or 10 seconds, and then you don't have to touch it. You don't have to touch your phone on Shabbat. But you said it. Now, there's another concern that we don't make noise on Shabbat, right? We said we want to keep the atmosphere. We don't want to leave on a radio or TV. Even in Chutz La'aretz, where there's going to be non-Jews operating it, we don't want to be violating our Shabbat sound atmosphere. For the sake of getting up for shul, for having an alarm ring for 5 or 10 seconds, the rabbis are lenient, and most rabbis say that it's fine to put it on an alarm if it's going to go off without you touching any electronics, activating anything or deactivating anything. So that can be allowed because it's for the sake of a mitzvah, it's for the sake of Shabbat. And it's not violating any of the 39 categories at work. You're not doing anything. But we have to go back to the basis of why are we avoiding electronics? Which category of work does electronics fit in? Which one of the 39? Who says it's even prohibited?
I think fire.
You think fire? Aha, that shows that you are not a scientist. Because there's no fire involved in any electronics, to tell you the truth. According to most understandings, at first, this discussion happened about 150 to 200 years ago when electricity became popular and it became a feature of modern life. The rabbis tried to figure out, what is it? They had to learn science. They had to learn physics. They had to learn, and when the digital age came, they had to learn electronics, and they have to know exactly what is a circuit, how the electrons work, what is closing a circuit, what's opening a circuit, and the rabbis did that job over the last 150 years, and you know what the result is?
Everything's a sword.
Of course, the result is that it's a machloket. You should know already that there's debates between the rabbis. For the most part, like I've been telling you all along, we avoid it. We avoid activating electronics, like electricity of all kinds. We avoid it if possible. But there is a difference between a fluorescent light bulb and an incandescent light bulb. One with a little filament that heats up and gives off the glow. That's like fire. That really is fire. But electricity, just putting on a fan where there's no filament which heats up, is perhaps less prohibited. It's just a question of electricity as opposed to light, which is fire. So it's a long and complicated issue. Bottom line is, we will discuss it. It's a chapter in the book coming up. But we avoid activating electronics, electricity, lights. Can you drive a car on Shabbat? Everybody knows that, right? Because combustion engine, there's fire there, right? There's fire. There's fuel that gets burnt up. There's a fire in there. I know we don't see it, but wait a minute. Now there's electric cars. Tesla famously, right? Is that also prohibited? Well, the rabbis had to go back to the books. First, they had to understand the technology. How does it work? What circuits are being closed? What's being opened? Is there any of the 39 categories involved? And the bottom line is no. Obviously, we don't use cars on Shabbat, but also some of the considerations of the sages is that we don't want to ruin the character of the day. A lot of people have been asking me over the last couple of weeks, can I keep my phone on Shabbat? Because I want to get the alert. I have the Homefront Command app, and it'll tell me if I don't hear the siren, for some reason the siren doesn't work, the phone app will tell me to go into the safe room. Could save my life. So we have to understand what's going on in your phone. What's the level of the electronics going on? Is it a violation of the 39 categories of work? The bottom line is, of course, like everything, there are some debates, but the bottom line is that we don't use our phones on Shabbat in regular circumstances. But in the case of security needs, we're really far away from any of the 39 categories of work in using a phone that runs on a battery with an LED screen and or whatever kind of screen we have. Liquid crystal display, I think LCD, they used to be, now they're LEDs, now they're all sorts of, they're very far away from anything associated with the 39 categories of work, and therefore, for security needs, by all means, you can keep your phone on. If you feel uncomfortable when you go to shul, if you feel your family's far away, they're scared, you can even carry it in your pocket. Of course, we don't turn it on, we don't play with it, but what happens if, let's say the battery is running out, and you need it for your security alerts, you can plug it in on Shabbat as well. For the case of security needs, even using the electricity to plug it, to charge your phone, we're really very far away from any of the biblical prohibition. And when it comes to rabbinic prohibition, in a case of extreme circumstances, the rabbis can be flexible. So yes, if necessary. Now, of course, we don't want Shabbat to be ruined. So the first, I think 2 weeks ago, on Shabbat, I did carry my phone, especially also we had other health concerns of my mother-in-law. I carried my phone with me. But this last Shabbat, I didn't, because already we were less, the fear was less intense, and the need was not so great, and it changes your day if you're carrying around the electronics in your pocket. Ultimately, we don't want to change the rules of Shabbat for all time. It's only for emergency situations that we can be flexible, and since it's very far from a biblical prohibition, it could be allowed. Okay?
But even when the security situation, when you live in Tacoma, and you don't get a local alert if there's some.
So we have a whole system. There's a whole system of alerts, and my calculation was I'm not going to be somewhere by myself. I'm somewhere, where do I go? I go from my home to the shul. In the shul, there's 30 people. Half of them are with guns and with phones on anyways, because they're on duty, right? Especially nowadays, right? So if I was going to go for a walk in the park by myself, far away from everybody, maybe I would take my phone because I wanted to keep updated, but everything depends on the level of need. If not needed, we should not use our phones. If it's not a necessity, if you're in a place where there's alerts, and it's better that you don't use your phones, obviously.
If you're just in the city or someplace, and the home command app has alerts. I mean, if there's a terrorist walking around, you're not going to hear a siren. So
right.
You need that on you. I mean, you need that. That with you.
I think we have to follow the rules. I think the rules, until the instructions are everybody must keep a phone on them for the sake of the alerts, then we don't have to be holier than the Pope, as they say, right? If there's a serious concern of terrorists breaching at any moment, like where I am, maybe there's such a concern. Jerusalem, listen, they could come from anywhere. Everything is we're in a war.
Last week,
Sorry, yeah.
I went to the old city.
Yeah.
And I thought about, is it worth it to bring a phone? Because Friday nights, there's always talk in my neighborhood about the villages that are close by.
Sure.
Overrun us and all
Right.
that. It's a whole city called Machon. They live there. They're present everywhere.
Right.
All the incidents.
But every 10 meters, there's a camera in the old city.
There's cameras and stuff. But like you said,
Cameras
you won't know about someone with a knife on the street.
And your phone is going to stop them?
No.
If you
No.
know there's a Hamasnik, to be ready. You're going to be surprised.
Yeah. No, by all means. I'm not saying it's prohibited. I'm not saying it's prohibited. I'm saying you have to make the calculation based on the situation. The situation is many times confusing, and a lot of people go overboard, but a lot of people are not as careful as they should be. And so the best public policy is follow the instructions of the official security authorities. And if the authorities say everybody must carry a phone, so then you carry a phone. But if they don't, they just say, if you hear a siren, go to the nearest shelter. So then you can do that on Shabbat. If you personally feel, I'm anxious, I'm not going to have a Shabbat enjoyment unless I'm carrying my phone, you have my heter. I allow you to carry your phone.
As far as I know, that is the advice.
I'm not sure. We have to check. I don't know. That you should always have a phone on you. I'm not sure.
I didn't carry it in the end last week, but that's because the person I was going to, he would have held that you don't do that, even if the authority says. So
I see. Well, okay.
So I didn't bring it.
I see. It's hard to know. Yeah.
No, the Hamas and the terrorists knew on Shabbat we don't use the phone, we don't get any
Right.
That's why they attack us, right?
Right.
Because of that,
Right.
we are in the war right now. Even the Prime Minister told we are in
War.
the
Sure. Right.
Because of that, we have to be little bit, about the phone.
More careful. Yeah. That makes sense. What you're saying makes sense. Is that we can't take anything for granted now. It's not normal times. It's true.
I mean, in Machon Meir, the door is locked, hopefully.
Yeah. It's a glass door. You can break it in a second. That's nothing. We need to we should have an armed guard. I don't know why we don't, but.
Even Daniel doesn't want to have a gun. Like, the guard, he's like, I don't know.
He should. But listen, I'm not in charge of security. The people in charge of security, that's their job, to define the level of threat. There are other times where we did have an armed guard. But if the level of threat now is if that's the decision they made, it makes sense. I mean, personally, they did call on every citizen who can to get a gun license. And if you have a gun, a licensed gun, you should carry it around. So the truth is, I applied for a gun. I applied to get a license, and then I'm going to buy one probably and carry it with me. I thought, we were safe. I was relying on the other people with the guns, but I see now that every gun matters, and I don't want to. I don't like the idea of having a gun on me, but we have to be wise as well. And like you say, Hanana, this is a special situation. We can't just pretend we live in the world that we did 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. The world changed. And the threats are there, yes.
The neighbor, he put a bike in the stairs. I told him, it's the way that I come in.
Right.
He says, I'm not religious.
Yeah. What's it have to do with religion, though?
You need to move the bike?
Yeah.
You need to move the bike every time?
No, he must move because I can't come in. Not me.
Is that how you contact me
And
yesterday?
then who did I call police? But I don't know.
You contacted me yesterday and you said I need help with something, but when I asked you why, I didn't get a response. Was that what it was about?
Yeah.
About the bicycle? Oh,
Because the guy is big.
Oh,
You don't want to mess with him.
Stop him then. I'm small.
All right, we'll look into it. We'll try to help you out there, and we'll figure out what the...
Blocks
You
the
shouldn't have anything blocking you. You have to have access. Even though in Jerusalem you have 1.5 minutes, it still takes a while to get to a safe space, and you shouldn't have to navigate in a dangerous place.
Can I call the police?
You can, but better first. Let me speak to Yechiel about it. I'm going to ask him to look into the matter. Okay? He's a neighbor, and he's pretty big too. Okay. Anyways, back to the laws of Shabbat, okay?
Yes.
Okay? Back to the laws of Shabbat. It's good. The questions are good. The questions are so important. And by all means, if carrying a phone, there's very little when it comes to the nuts and bolts of the laws of Shabbat. There's a very little danger of violating a biblical prohibition, and for the sake of anxiety or security, by all means, carry your phone without a second thought. I had this question asked to me by a number of people, and even someone in the army. I almost yelled at him. What do you mean? You're doing your job in the army. You're in a war. Somebody asked me about, the people are bringing food and or dishes, and if we bring them new dishes, there's a law that you're supposed to immerse new dishes into a mikvah. What do we do about that? I said to them, in the Talmudic law about war, it says that if you're at war, if you're a soldier, you can eat treif. You can eat non-kosher. Forget about eating kosher food in a vessel which maybe should be immersed. So there's a lot of leniencies if you need them, if you have the time, and of course we try to eat kosher food at all possible. As a matter of fact, many fancy chef restaurants in Tel Aviv have become kosher now because they want to give food to the soldiers. And there's a rule in Tzahal, all Tzahal has to be kosher. It's an amazing thing. It's the only kosher army in the world. So they want to be able to give food to all the soldiers. So they became kosher for the first time in 50 years. A lot of restaurants are becoming kosher. Very interesting. But the truth is, if it was really a case of war where there's no food and the soldier needs food, he can eat it even if it's not kosher. Like I said, we're very far away from this. So for sure you can carry your phone if you need to. And we still try to keep the Shabbat atmosphere as much as possible. Yeah?
How far does that extend for civilians, for us? Like when he was in Sderot and he didn't have very many options for 3 days, is it considered pikuach nefesh?
Absolutely, pikuach nefesh. If you're in the middle of a terror attack, pikuach nefesh, a danger to life, you do what you need to save your life. You use your phone, you call, you drive. If you listen, I took my son to the army. He drove there. It was Shabbat and Simchas Torah. It was a holiday and Shabbat, and he drove. And he drove to he was called up to be a soldier. So of course, whenever there's an actual and now they're even training on Shabbat because we are actively in a war. It's a little bit confusing because there's a lull now. Mainly it's the Air Force which is attacking, and maybe a few units near the borders. But for the most part, all the other hundreds of thousands of soldiers are training and resting. The people up on top are hopefully planning. Hopefully they know what the next move is. But until the next move, there's not as much active warfare going on as we expect from a war. And so it's very confusing. And here we are. We're not in a shelter. You go out, some stores are open. The schools went back. Yesterday, all the schools are open. So it's very confusing. Is it a time of war? Is it a dangerous situation where we pull out every allowance in the book because it's a dangerous situation? Or is it not? Maybe, there's sort of an in-between stage. So basically, the rule is clear. If there's any doubt that it could be dangerous situation, dangerous to a life, pikuach nefesh, don't ask any questions. Do first. What did they say? Shoot first and ask questions later? Yeah. Violate the Shabbat first and then talk to your rabbi afterwards. Don't ask questions. Oh, am I allowed? If it's a security concern, go ahead and do it even if it's on Shabbat. But if you plan ahead of time and we're talking now, not everything is pikuach nefesh, not in all situations. And I think the general guiding policy should be whatever the authorities say. Well, we have to check. If authorities say to carry phones...
They're not interested in Shabbat.
Right, but they have supervision they have some rabbis with them, and I don't think what I did see is that some rabbis put out a thing that you should leave on a radio. They have and TV. Not everybody has a phone, believe it or not. But their radio and TV, you don't want to have the TV on all Shabbat.
Yeah, but then you get every siren going off.
So what you do is you have the silent channel. There's something called the silent channel. It's amazing. They said this is just for the sake of the war. They don't have any news. They don't have any music. They don't really talk shows during the week. 24/6. They have talk and advertisements and songs. And for Shabbat, for 25 hours, it's called the silent channel. They have it on radio. They have it on TV. They have a few of them. And you can leave your radio on to that channel. And it'll only make an announcement which is necessary for security. For example, if there's a siren or something like that.
But it's a national alert.
So that's a problem, yeah. That's why the app is better, huh? Yeah. The app can be localized. You tell them where you are, and you only get alerts for your area, not for Beersheba or, Eilat.
Yeah, alerts for your family members if you want to.
Wow.
You'll be responsible.
It's a good app, huh?
Yeah.
You can choose a few locations, not only where you are. So obviously the app is more convenient, but you're allowed and it's advised to put on such a radio on a silent channel so that you can get the alerts if necessary. But I agree with you, the app is better. Yeah.
In terms of the community as a whole, just to expand it another level outward, there's a lot of action going on. It seems like every day there's something new happening. It's Jewish stores, schools,
Anti-Semitism.
synagogues, all kinds of anti-Semitism is popping out. Where there was a girl in Detroit that got killed recently.
What?
A rabbi in Detroit.
What?
Female rabbi. She was head of the reform.
What?
She was murdered in her home, and the authorities initially said, "We don't have any evidence of this anti-Semitic attack." But she was the director of.
It's terrible.
Reform center. It was happened last week.
So
Oh my gosh.
People in these communities during this current war, are they on the same footing as us, or are they?
No, they have a different level. Their security authorities in their locale have to determine what security measures are necessary by all means, and they can carry guns if necessary, and they can use their communications devices, whatever. But whatever, it depends on the danger in that location. You can't just say, "Oh, there's a war in Israel, so everybody Chutz La'aretz can." Although, if, for example, somebody's collecting equipment for the soldiers and sending over, I don't know, bulletproof vests or something, which we don't have enough of apparently, or not yet, and you're getting together all the equipment and you want to transport it from Chicago to New York to get it to the plane. And that plane is going to go to Israel, to the fighting forces. There is room to be lenient and to say this is part of the war effort. The geography doesn't matter. The activity matters. The activity is related to saving a life. And in the case of war, all the logistics is part of the army. So then there's room to be lenient, even if you're in New York. Ultimately, if the point is to get what's needed for the battlefront, it could be allowed. Yeah, listen, if it's possible to get it there on Sunday or on Friday, and it's the same thing, it's just for your own convenience to do it on Saturday, so then you're just ignoring the Shabbat and you're degrading the Shabbat. But if you're doing everything as quickly as you can, by all means, you can do it on Shabbat if it's for the sake of the war effort, yes. Save a life, many lives. Ezrat Hashem, we should be successful. Okay, now let's read page 144. Page 144 talks about the second level. Gershon, you read for us?
Number 3?
Yeah.
Okay, number 3.
Chapter 9, section 3.
Performing melacha with the shinoi or together with another person. As we saw in section 1, the Torah prohibits doing melacha on Shabbat in a normal manner as the craftsmen did in the Mishkan, as it is written, to work with every menachet Hashem, Shemot 35:33. However, if one performs the activity backhandedly, that is, with the shinoi, with the change, he has not transgressed the Torah prohibition. He is therefore not subject to the punishment that the Torah prescribed for a Shabbat desecrator. Accordingly, it would seem that one may perform all the melachot on Shabbat with the shinoi. However, the sages instituted a safeguard around the Torah and prohibited performing melachot even with the shinoi. For example, if one removes an object from a private domain to a public one in a normal manner, by carrying it in his hand or under his arm, he has transgressed the Torah commandment. However, if he carries it with a shinoi, for example, with his leg, with his mouth, or on his elbow, ear, or hair, he has transgressed a rabbinic prohibition only. Okay, stop there for a second. So, it's still prohibited, even if you do it in the abnormal way, except in cases for the sake of a mitzvah or a great need, of course, emergency for pikuach nefesh. You could even do a biblical in the regular manner. You don't have to do any shinui. But the fact that you do it as shinui, it only takes it down one level. Now, skip to page 145, section 4, please. What's this whole idea of the rabbis adding a layer? Go ahead. The principles underlying rabbinic enactments and decrees regarding Shabbat. The sages instituted numerous enactments concerning Shabbat in order to erect a protective fence around the Torah. They prohibited taking medication unless one grind up ingredients to produce them. They prohibited riding on animals and using trees so that nobody would come to break off a branch. They prohibited setting sexual malt. They Meiser, priestly gifts and tithing, because this resembles allocating the terumah and making the fruits useful. They prohibited playing musical instruments so that people would not come to fix their instruments. And they prohibited asking a non-Jew to do melacha for Jews. They also ruled that one may not benefit from a melacha that was performed on Shabbat in a forbidden manner. Should I keep going?
Yep.
The sages also enacted other ordinances whose purpose is to preserve the spirit of Shabbat as a day of rest and holiness. They ordained that on Shabbat, one should not speak of mundane business matters, nor inspect one's fields or factories. They established that one should not prepare for the upcoming weekdays on Shabbat. They instituted that one should not walk quickly on Shabbat, as one does during the week, and that one refrain from measuring things in a way that one does during the week. They further decreed that all objects that have not been designated for Shabbat use are considered muktzah and may not be moved. This is to prevent one from spending his time on Shabbat organizing his home or garage, thus rendering Shabbat like a weekday. Keep going?
Yep.
Okay. The rabbinic prohibitions of doing malacha with shinoi or together with another person are also based on these same two reasons: to ensure that people not mistakenly violate the malacha in the normal fashion, and to preserve the spirit of Shabbat. The sages do not add prohibitions to those of the Torah on their own. The Torah itself commands us to institute safeguards in the verse, "You shall keep my injunctions, shmartem et mishmarti." Vayikra 18:30. Upon which the sages comment, "Make a safeguard for my injunctions." Asu mishmira the mishmarti. Yevamot 21a. The Torah also instructs the sages to enact ordinances for the Jews in order to give expression to the Torah's goals, as is written. Ask your father, he will inform you. Your elders, they will tell you. Rabbi 32:7. Furthermore, we are commanded to obey these ordinances, as it is written. You must not deviate from the verdict that they tell you, either to the right or to the left. Hebrews 17:11, see Shabbat 23a. The reason for this is that the written Torah is eternal. It is meant only to delineate general principles. In order for us to be able to observe the Torah in practice, the sages were commanded to establish a framework for its mitzvah by instituting safeguards and decrees based on the principles laid down in the written Torah. So it is with regard to Shabbat. We are prohibited from doing melacha so that we rest and stop working, as is written, but on the seventh day cease. Shabbat 34:21. And you shall not do any melacha, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your ox or your ass, or any of your cattle, or the stranger in your settlements, so that your male and female slave may rest as you do. Devarim 5:14. If one were allowed to do all this work with the shinoi, he would never cease from labor. And if he were allowed to move muktzah items, he would never rest. In order to prevent this scenario, the sages prohibited performing melachot with the shinoi and moving muktzah items. See Ramban to Vayikra 23:24, Mishnah Torah 21:1, and Mishnah Torah 24:12. The mandate to enact decrees was given to the Beit Din HaGadol, the high Jewish court that functioned in earlier times, the Sanhedrin, which was made up of 71 sages and held court near the Mishkan or the temple. This court was established by Moshe and continued to function until after the destruction of the Second Temple. All of its members were ordained in an unbroken chain that stretched back to Moshe. The entire Jewish people was bound by the ordinances of this Beit Din. The Torah states, "You shall act in accordance with what they tell you from the place that God shall choose, and scrupulously carry out whatever they instruct. You shall act in accordance with the Torah they instruct you, and the sentence handed to you. You must not deviate from the verdict that they tell you, either to the right or to the left." Devarim 17:10 and 11.
Okay, so everything we said up till now, this is about the biblical violations. But then, as I said, there is another whole level of rabbinic enactments. Now, some of those rabbinic enactments are also connected to these 39 categories of work. We want to make sure that you don't even come close to violating them. But some of them are connected to all the way back to the Shabbat idea. The ideas of Shabbat is that you're supposed to rest on Shabbat, and you're supposed to have an atmosphere of holiness on Shabbat. One example of these is maybe, for example, muktzeh. What is muktzeh? We're going to learn about it later. Muktzeh is, it literally, the word means set aside. Muktzeh, set aside. Basically, the rabbi said there's certain objects or items that you're not allowed to move, to handle. So, for example, this pen. From the Torah, I'm not allowed to write with it. But I can play with it, I can hold it, I can carry it. Rabbinically, they said no. If you were holding it and writing it, maybe you'll come to write. So that's one example of something which is muktzeh. But there's another type of muktzeh, and that is every stick and stone that has not been set aside for use on Shabbat. Basically, the entire world, if it's not been prepared, all the vessels, all tools, all furniture, all books, all dishes, all those are designed for the use of men. So they're allowed to be handled. But things which are just raw materials, which have not been prepared for the Shabbat, they come under the category of muktzeh, and therefore we're not allowed to handle them. So,
how do you define prepared for Shabbat?
Simple as it sounds. If someone has said before Shabbat, this stone, I want to use it as a paperweight, so then it's allowed. But if he didn't, before Shabbat, say, I'm going to use the stone, you just find a stone in the street, it's muktzeh. It's set aside, it's not for Shabbat use. So it has to have been designated as something for use for human activity. So most things that we touch and we handle, a glass, a book, those are for human use, for every day of the week, so that you don't have to do anything special for them. But things which are raw materials, like I said, like sticks in the yard, if it's not your hockey stick, then that's allowed. Hockey stick is something which you could use on Shabbat. But if it's just sticks and stones, or especially if it's electronics, something that you're not allowed to use on Shabbat, like we just talked about, we don't use electronics. So you're not allowed to move your electronics. If you've got your computer on your table, you don't touch it, you don't move it off the table. There are certain rules we have to learn about when we learn about muktzeh, how and when you can make space. If you need the table to have your Shabbat meal and the computer's on it, in most cases you can move the computer away and use the table. But if you're not going to use the table, you just forgot it there, and you're not going to use you have a different table to use. So then you don't move it. You don't move electronics. You don't move things around. Wherever it was when Shabbat entered, it should remain there because we don't handle it. That's the principle of muktzeh. Okay, but we're going to learn more about it later. This is just, I bring it now because it's a classic example of a rabbinic prohibition, which is not only associated with one of the 39 categories of work. A stone, you're not going to cook with it, you're not going to plow with it, it's just forbidden because the sages created this category that anything not designated for Shabbat use should not be used, and therefore it's muktzeh. Okay, it's sort of like a general rabbinic enactment which preserves the character of the day of Shabbat as a day of rest. We're going to have to stop here, and B'ezrat Hashem, pretty much we're going to skip to the next chapter and get into some nitty-gritty, some details. The first melacha is bishul, cooking, and we're not going to learn the rest of the details. That's more for rabbis, the rest of chapter 9. We're going to skip ahead to chapter 10 and get started next week. Is today Thursday? We talked about the laws of Shabbat. We didn't sing a song. So let's quickly do a song for Shabbat. Do you remember last week's? Mizmor, mizmor, shir, shir leyom ha-Shabbat. Mizmor, mizmor, shir, shir leyom ha-Shabbat. Mizmor, Mizmor, Shir. Shir Yom HaShabbat. Mizmor. I sent you the link. Did you get it? Shir Yom HaShabbat. Mizmor, Shir. Shir